The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.
I feel like there are very encouraging stories that do need to be told. I mean, I think, and that's what the Passive House Accelerator is all about, is creating a place for people to come together and share lessons learned and pitfalls to avoid and all that.
Are you speeding the energy transition? Here at the Clean Power Hour, our hosts Tim Montague and John Weaver bring you the best in solar, batteries, and clean technologies every week. Want to go deeper into decarbonization? We do too. We're here to help you understand and command the commercial, residential, and utility solar, wind, and storage industries. So let's get to it. Together we can speed the energy transition.
Today on the Clean Power Hour, Passive House. What is it? What does it mean for decarbonizing the built environment? My guest today is Zach Semke. He is the director of the Passive House Accelerator. I'm very excited to have this conversation. It's a homecoming for me. I did a lot of work with the Passive House industry about 10 years ago. And if you don't know about it, you're going to want to geek out on this. It is super cool, super energy efficient technology and standards for the built environment. Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify so that others can find this content. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube. All of our content is on YouTube. And tell a friend about the show. The Clean Power Hour wants to grow and achieve our mission of speeding the energy transition. With that, I want to welcome Zach Semke to the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Tim. It's so great to be here.
Zach is the director of the Passive House Accelerator, an organization dedicated to spreading knowledge and information and resources for the Passive House community and ultimately net zero or net negative technologies and standards. So thank you for your work. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, Zach. How did you get interested in the built environment and energy efficiency?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, out of college, a long time ago, I got involved in advocacy for progressive regional planning. So essentially looking at the urban growth boundaries. This was in Portland, Oregon. Urban growth boundaries, transportation reform, equitable access to affordable housing, basically how to create a more sustainable city. So that was my first introduction to this world of the built environment. And in that work, I saw firsthand there was sort of the importance of good design. So I was kind of introduced a little bit to the role that architecture and urban design can play in that because it's easy for NIMBYism and to work at cross purposes with creating a more, honestly, a little bit more of a dense neighborhood, kind of traditional neighborhood as opposed to a sprawling neighborhood. So that was sort of the first foray. And then I did performing arts for 11 years. So had a kind of a 180 or I don't know, a different experience, a different turn. And then went to school, grad school in landscape design. And just as the crash was happening, in the late 2000s, right, 2008, and worked for a landscape architecture firm for a couple of years. And I was really interested in creating public spaces, parks and that sort of thing. But all of the work just dried up, and was casting about for what to do next, and got connected with a company called Hammer in Hand in Portland, Oregon, just as they were getting involved in Passive House. And so this was like 2009, 2010. So this is just a couple of years before you started doing some consulting work, I think, with Fias, right? So Sam Hagerman, one of the co-owners of Hammer in Hand, had just taken a course with Katrin Klingenberg in Seattle. It was this kind of formative course for a whole bunch of Passive House practitioners here in the Northwest. So he had just taken that course, was really jazzed about Passive House. He kind of thought of it as the unified field theory for him as a builder, bringing together all these sort of disparate pieces of knowledge into a system, and started doing Passive House. And so I ended up starting to do kind of like science communication and about the building science, learning the building science, and communicating about that in our blog and on video, and just got hooked, and really just was so excited by the potential of buildings to play a role in the clean energy transition, in decarbonizing our economy. Probably maybe listeners are aware that 40% of greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings. So it's a big part of the problem. And Passive House is one of the avenues to make it a big part of the solution.
Yeah, I have very fond memories of Sam. He was a thought leader, and he joined the board, I think, of FIAS. So he was very, very active in expanding their work, and he brought real street credibility, right, as a builder to the table. There's levels, right? You have the academics, so to speak, right, and architects who are planning things and designing things. But then there's the people who actually bring it out of the ground and make it real. And it takes a good integration and, what is the word? It's when you bring it all together. So FIAS and PHI, the two big Passive House organizations, are kind of parallel universes, but doing the same thing, basically, right? Training professionals to adopt these standards, which is standards are a necessary evil. We humans will do really dumb things if we don't have standards and codes to guide us, right? But so that's cool. And I remember seeing your talk. You gave a talk about a black swan events at the Pittsburgh conference for Passive House that I attended in 2013 or 2014, I want to say. And I was really blown away by that talk, to be honest. I really enjoyed it. I didn't even know about black swan events. These are very rare events, but highly impactful for humanity. And we're seeing black swan events more and more because we're changing the environment. We have created something called the Anthropocene now, right? Humans now dominate the built environment, the natural world, and the things we eat, like chickens and pigs and cows, far outweigh the biomass of other living things now, because we have so capably taken over. And unfortunately, there's an ecological phenomenon called overshoot and collapse, which, if we're not careful, is going to really bite us in the butt. I don't know if there's any avoiding the collapse. When any population grows very quickly, I'm an ecologist by training, and this is a well-known phenomenon in population ecology, that you ride the rocket ship up, wolves on an island full of deer and moose. The wolves just go to town, they grow, but then they run out of food and they collapse. And we humans have done this with fossil fuels, and I have nothing against fossil fuels, right? They gave us the modern life that we have. They gave us civilization, really. And now we just have to transition to better, cleaner technologies, and Passive House is vital in that regard. You mentioned communications. You're a podcaster like myself. That's how we came to this table, is, through podcasting. Why are you so passionate for communication and for podcasting now?
Well, I mean, we need to tell stories about how to get out of this mess that you just rightly, painted there. Mm-hmm. And I think, and I feel like there are very encouraging stories that do need to be told. I mean, I think, and that's what the Passive House Accelerator is all about, is creating a place for people to come together and share lessons learned and pitfalls to avoid and all that. So for me, just, I'm not a practitioner. I've never designed a passive house. I'm a certified passive house consultant, but that was just so that I could really, educate myself more deeply about the building science and how all of this comes together. So the contribution I can make is to help be bring out the stories of the people who are doing this work, and so that I think that the Black Swan piece, just to go back to that a little bit, is Black Swans can describe both positive and negative events, and so on the climate crisis side, we see all sorts of potential tipping points and scary things, right? But what struck me as I was reading the book, The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb, I saw this depiction. The story of the Black Swan is essentially the story of the life of a turkey, right? Which is like this wavering upward line of the turkey getting happier and fatter over time. But the problem is, for the turkey, Thanksgiving is a Black Swan event. Like, he or she never sees this event coming.
Yep.
But the Thanksgiving comes and the axe comes down, and this system that the turkey figured he understood,
yep,
is completely disrupted and changed by this unforeseen event, and that's the Black Swan. And there are all these things in history that, like, that the fall of the Berlin Wall, 9/11. You could argue that the election of Donald Trump, all sorts of different Black Swan events, and certainly lots in climate change. When I read that book, saw that graph, and then I saw another graph that was of the cost of solar energy compared to fossil fuel energy. And so it's this graph that has fossil fuel energy over the last decades, just, kind of wavering. It's pretty much flatlined. And then this crashing from the sky cost of solar plummeting, starting, like, it didn't even register on the graph because it was so ridiculously expensive before, yep. But then it completely plummets and becomes cost competitive with fossil fuel energy overnight. And that is, I think, one example of a Black Swan. And
yes,
and I think changes everything.
It is interesting that they can be good and bad, right? And there usually is a double edge to everything. Like fossil fuels, the discovery of fossil fuels were a Black Swan. We didn't know that there was all this super rich energy just right beneath the surface of the ground in the form of coal, oil, and natural gas. And then all of a sudden, right? And it is a heyday, and it completely changes our future forever. Meanwhile, it also shoots ourselves in the foot in many ways. The fallout from climate change, ocean acidification, rising sea levels, global warming, the atmosphere, the climate getting warmer, weather extremes getting more great, and now disruption of food systems for humanity. That's going to be the big black eye that we don't really see here in North America yet so much. But in less developed places, there are many millions of people who are immigrating or migrating en masse. And when humans migrate en masse, all hell breaks loose to wherever they're going to, because nobody likes it when a bunch of strangers show up on their doorstep. And generally, there's conflict. And that's no fun. But let's talk about Passive House. What are the tenets of Passive House for our listeners who don't know?
Yeah, so Passive House is a focus on making a better building. So really focusing on the quality of the building envelope. There are 3 key performance metrics for Passive House, and you mentioned that there's Passive House Institute and there's FIAS. There are these 2 different standards, and they have important differences. But what they share are these 3 key metrics, and that is 1, creating a building that has very low thermal energy demand, so very little energy required for heating and cooling. 2 is a building that has very little total energy demand, so you're also looking at plug loads and appliances. And 3 is that it is pretty airtight. And that's something that's measured with a blower door test. And the reason for that is first and foremost, actually building durability, because the flow of moisture through flow of air rather, through building assembly, especially if it's well insulated, can be really dangerous. And because it can bring tons and tons of moisture into assemblies and create building failure. So airtightness is key for building durability, but also and it's also a really powerful energy efficiency measure. So those three things to come together, those three metrics are basically what Passive House is all about. There are 5 classic design principles for Passive House that help achieve those 3 metrics. So continuous insulation, and for larger buildings like a multifamily building, the difference between a Passive House level of insulation and a conventional building insulation may not be that large. It can almost be similar to code sometimes. But the idea is that it's continuous, it's wrapping the entire building in a continuous way, and there are no thermal bridges. And I think that this is a really key insight that Passive House brings to the green building world, is this focus on no thermal bridges. So a thermal bridge is an element in a building that allows heat to bypass the thermal barrier of the continuous insulation. So, you could think like the worst possible thermal bridge would be like a steel girder that's going through the building envelope, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of care at the design phase of just designing the building assemblies of the building envelope, the walls, the roof, the foundation, so there are no thermal bridges. So we create thermal breaks to stop those thermal bridges. So that's the second of the 5. Then airtight construction. So that's really about just care in the assembly and some simple materials. You can do paper membrane or liquid applied membranes. They vary. There are lots of cool products to make that happen.
Turning the house or building into a balloon, basically, right? Keeping it very airtight. Right.
That's right. And then high performance windows and doors, because you've created this great envelope, and then you're puncturing holes in it. So you want to make sure that those windows and doors are doing a good job of continuing that airtightness and continuing the thermal qualities of the envelope. So great windows and doors, and they're operable. So don't worry, you can always open these windows, right?
Yep.
And then the 5th one is fresh air with heat recovery. So it's just a fresh air system that's running 24/7, that's balanced. So the same volume of air is coming in as is going out, and as the stale air is going out, it is transferring passively its heat energy back into the intake air or the fresh air. And so it's like having a window open in terms of fresh air, but there's almost no loss in thermal energy. And the reverse is true in the summer. You can be passing the cool into the fresh air that's coming in, and it's filtered, which is key for resilience. I think that's one of the things I would love to touch on. And
and health, right? You want to filter out the dust and the pollen and other particulate pollutants. But now let's compare and contrast Passive House design to LEED. LEED, a system developed by the U.S. Green Building Council, is much better known historically, right? And a much bigger organization or body of professionals. So LEED was kind of the American predecessor, and then Passive House was developed in Germany and then brought to the U.S. by people like Kat Klingenberg, who started FIAS, the Passive House Institute U.S., who then developed a climate-specific model for Passive House, which was a break from her European brethren so that's really the dividing line between FIAS and PHI was FIAS is going to have standards that are climate specific, not just one standard for any climate, which I think makes a lot of sense. But the Europeans didn't necessarily agree with that. So anyway, contrast LEED for our listeners from Passive House, just at a high level.
Yeah, absolutely. So LEED is a checklist-based system where you check a bunch of boxes on it, and it's a much broader scope. So it's looking at the connection, like you can get points for bike racks, for example, or for the plantings in the landscape. That's actually my first. A long time ago, became a LEED accredited professional when I was doing landscape design. And there are 4, because at the time, I don't know what the situation is, there were 4 credits that you could get depending on your strategy for capturing rainwater and using native plants and that sort of thing. What else? They're also looking at recycled content of materials and toxicity. Lots of great stuff. I've often thought of LEED as being kind of the representing the breadth of green building, and Passive House is the depth on energy performance and health. And so they actually are complementary in many ways. It's also true, though, that as a Passive House person, I can't not say this, that there's a really strong correlation between Passive House modeling and actual energy performance. And there is not the same kind of correlation for LEED projects. And so there are... Yeah. And that's something that's come up a lot, and just this mismatch between expectations for the performance of LEED buildings and poor performance later.
You could design a LEED building that would get a good LEED score, but not be very energy efficient, or not much more energy efficient than standard construction. And that's because, as you pointed out, you can get points for so many things: the landscaping, the social aspect, having bike friendly or access resources for your employees and so forth, or the residents.
That's right. And it's also because it's not looking at the ultimate performance as the driver. So Passive House, it's not a checklist system. It's all about, here are the metrics. If you hit these metrics, it's a Passive House. If you don't hit these metrics, sorry, it's not. And then it has to do about the actual energy use that your building is going to use. Whereas LEED, you can imagine, like, you could create this really crenellated, crazy form that is very inherently energy inefficient. But if you show that you use energy efficient or better heating equipment, and you applied more insulation on that form, you could get energy points for that. Whereas with Passive House, you go, no, we're not going to start with some crazy form. We actually have to look at the implications of our design choices and what those mean for performance. And so it's just a different mindset, and it is resulting in real energy performance gains, which is why places like the city of Vancouver used to point to LEED for their their building standard, their green building kind of ambitions, and they moved to Passive House. And you see Massachusetts adopting Passive House into their stretch code. New York is adopting Passive House into their climate work, and it's because we have something now that, and it's just basically, it's based on building physics. It's just physics. It's not kind of proprietary or brand based. It's just, hey, let's apply building physics and understand how heat and moisture go through buildings and design accordingly. And then there's this set of digital tools that designers can use to make that. They don't have to become physicists themselves. Fortunately, they have these set of tools that they can apply to their designs to dial them in and create cool buildings that also perform well.
Yeah. And this is why I think Passive House is so important, it's a very first principles approach to building buildings that are 90% plus more efficient than standard construction. It means thicker walls. It means tighter envelopes. It means heat recovery ventilation. But again, we have all this technology. We just have to design for it and then make trade-offs on a case-by-case basis. Do you put resources into insulation or into photovoltaics? There are important trade-offs that you can make from an economic perspective, which also, so there's room for evolution, so to speak. And you've seen just in the last 10 years how Passive House has evolved and changed and grown. But let's talk about the accelerator, Zach, because I'm super excited for what you guys have done. And if you're listening, go to passivehouseaccelerator.com, just like it sounds, passivehouseaccelerator.com. It's an amazing storehouse of information. They've got a live event that they produce every week, which is attended by dozens and dozens of building professionals, which is super impressive what you guys have done with your live events. You've got a podcast. You've got a new YouTube channel, which we'll talk about. You've got a magazine, and then articles. So many resources here for people to engage and get more knowledgeable, but really to build your network and your knowledge base. So, what a great compliment to PHI and FIAS, who are, these standards bodies and great sources for professional training and certification of people and products, and methodologies, right? Those are great things. But now, it's the perfect triangle, I think, with the accelerator. So what is the story behind the accelerator? And tell us a little bit about, what you're up to and what the future of the accelerator is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Tim, that was an amazing summary of the accelerator. Very, very well done, and very very generous. It's been a really exciting ride. The accelerator is about 4 years old. It was started by Michael Ingui, who continues to be very involved in the work. Michael is a architect based in Manhattan. He lives in Brooklyn. He is one of the leaders in retrofit passive house projects in Brooklyn and Manhattan. So a lot of brownstones, and just taking these crazy, leaky, amazing but problematic buildings and turning them into just beautiful and quiet and full of fresh air spaces. So in that work, in order to achieve that, he has over time built this community of practice among his contractors. And so he in order to work with Michael as a builder or a subcontractor, you need to participate in these exchanges. They're debriefs, essentially, of learning from these buildings, from these projects, and share with your competitors what you learned, so that they can up their game on their next project. And so it's over time, that's become a community that people will really want to be part of, and has allowed him to be successful in delivering these complex, puzzles of retrofits of these crazy old buildings. So he wanted to create an online platform that had the same spirit, and then wanted to do the same thing, and recognized also that that the community wanted a place where people from all walks of passive house life and decarbonizing buildings life could come together. So there wasn't this is only FIAS or this is only PHI. It was basically this is all comers are welcome. This is ecumenical. We can learn from one another's successes and mistakes, and move this forward. This actually, just as a little aside, this goes back to a similar concept that, like the solar cost curve, Wright's law, Swanson's law, that the power of learning to drive down cost. It's not exactly the same in the built environment. It's slower, but the same sort of dynamic is at play. And so if we can figure out how to be better about sharing our lessons with one another, then we can bring the cost delta between conventional construction and passive house construction down closer and closer towards zero. And in some cases, depending on the climate and the building type, it's actually pretty darn close, or even at zero. That's not the case in all building types, of course. So that's, for me, that's what made me really passionate about joining forces with Michael and becoming part of the accelerator, was that potential of helping to get to a place where we don't have to have a cost conversation anymore about Passive House. So yeah.
Tell us a little more about the accelerator. What is the business model, and how long have you been part of the accelerator?
Yeah, so I joined in 2019, and at that time we thought, and the business model, the accelerator is an LLC, so we're a not profit-making for-profit business at this point. We're a media company, is essentially what we are. Mm-hmm. So I joined in 2019, and the idea at that point was that the accelerator would be an aggregator of news and articles that were already out there about Passive House, or that people could write. And to a degree, we're still that. But then COVID hit, and a couple of our good friends in Vancouver, BC, approached us. They had been doing in-person social events for years. So this is Sean St. Amour and Monty Paulson. Sean had been organizing Passive House socials for forever there. The COVID hit, and I think it was probably Monty's brainstorm was like, hey, let's do a Zoom. So the very first week of lockdown, they organized a Zoom where somebody came and presented about Passive House. And it was the University of Victoria project. And I think there were like 90 people there, and very successful. And then they approached us and said, hey, this was really great, but we don't want to organize these. Would you be willing to do that? They were looking for a platform that would be, agnostic to PHI or FIAS projects, open to both. And we were like, of course, we'd love to do that. And it just took off. And so this was the early days of COVID. So Zoom was something that was exciting for people. People were, hungry to connect socially. And so we had Zoom calls of like 300 people coming together, and, they'd last 2.5 hours. We'd start with a short, fast, factual, and fun was the moniker or the slogan. Fast, factual, and fun presentation for 15 to 20 minutes tops, and then a bunch of Q&A, open discussion as a Zoom meeting, not a Zoom webinar. And that became our identity, really, and it sort of supercharged this role, or kind of accelerated our taking on the role of being a community hub and a place that everyone was coming together. And so we had, people from New Zealand, from Australia, from Germany, from all across the US and Canada, Mexico. I mean, all over the place in Europe and the UK. So we became this place where, we'd produce a bunch of events, and that's continues to this day. And so now our average is about 150 people on our Wednesday calls, which is pretty amazing.
It is totally amazing.
Yeah.
I love that goal, fast and fun. And you're doing something right, because those calls, I've just been on a few of them, but they're so well attended, and you attract such tremendous talent to give, quick talks, and then you have breakout discussions, and, so you're connecting people to one another and giving you're creating an outlet for people to share their ideas and expertise internationally. We get this occasionally in the solar industry at conferences, but we don't get it on a weekly basis, other than through webinars, and those are so one way generally, right? They're subject matter experts giving presentations or being part of a panel discussion, which is useful, but it's not it's not what you have created with your live events, this gathering and meeting. So it's an amazing clearinghouse. So let's just reiterate, you're doing these live weekly events. And so when you go to passivehouseaccelerator.com, you go to attend that tab, then there you see the accelerator live. But you're doing other events as well, right? Not just this Zoom meeting. You're doing some face-to-face events?
We are starting to do that. So, for example, coming up in the first week of May, we're doing an event with an organization called Brick and Wonder, which is an architecture, engineering, construction community in New York City, and we're doing an in-person event collaboratively with them about retrofits of buildings. There's this local law 97 in New York, which is mandating that buildings begin to perform better and better over time. And so there are all these existing buildings that need to dramatically reduce their carbon emissions. So retrofits are key. So that's what that's about. We also worked with the Passive House Institute recently for their conference in Wiesbaden, Germany, to we co-hosted their party at the conference party, and then before that we co-hosted the conference party with FIAS in Chicago. So we're starting to do some in-person stuff, which is fun as well. But I still most of our programming is our online stuff, but we're really curious about what kind of unique ways we can do in-person events that complement the in-person events by the other organizations rather than compete with them.
That's great. But yeah, as you mentioned, both PHI and FIAS hold national or international conferences every year. And so you're augmenting that, which is wonderful and so important. For me, the most important thing about the accelerator is that you're bringing together these two camps. There really was a major schism politically between FIAS and PHI, and people tended to fall into one camp or another, and there was antagonism between the two. But it wasn't in the interest of net zeroing the built environment or the economy, or many professionals who are just like, we just want to do good work and build really good buildings. So get over it. I really love this model, and I'm trying to figure out ways of copying what you've done here. So let's definitely stay in touch.
Absolutely. I mean, that's very generous in your portrayal, but please do copy whatever you. Yeah, I'm happy to share.
Yeah, I mean, right today, the Clean Power Hour is just a fraction of what you guys are up to, and I do webinars, and I do podcasting, obviously, and I do a live show every week. But it's nothing like what you guys have been up to. What else, I guess, should we highlight in the last couple minutes together that people may not know about or may want to find? If you're working with building owners that are thinking about retrofitting their building, or working with designers who are designing buildings to be very low carbon, what else should our listeners know about the accelerator?
Good question. Well, definitely check out our new YouTube channel called Reimagine Buildings. We'll be doing more short form explainers about Passive House, the Passive House approach to design. I think one overarching thing is that Passive House is both a way to mitigate climate change, so reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and I think support the clean energy transition by basically hitting the winter peak load. Right, there's I don't know if you know the Falcon curve, right, where there's this massive increase in heating demand from buildings that has a big impact on the grid. That it happens in the winter when there's not a lot of sun, right? And if it's not windy, then maybe we have a problem with wind energy as well. So Passive House and energy efficiency in general can help address that. But the other piece of it is that it's about climate adaptation, and creating buildings that are more passively survivable, passively resilient to severe climate impacts. And we're beginning to experience those. We were all shocked in the Pacific Northwest when we got hit by those heat domes, completely. Yep. Like 115 degrees Fahrenheit in Portland, Oregon. 80 degrees is hot in the Pacific Northwest. Sometimes it hits 100 in Portland. 115 was freaking ridiculous. And those kinds of events, we need buildings that can withstand those and create livable conditions, even when the power fails because the grid is overtaxed by AC, all that stuff. Like the resilience of creating better buildings it's not just about the energy question. It's also now about our ability to thrive moving forward in this changing world. So I think that as you're thinking about all of the different elements that go into this important clean energy transition that we're doing, don't forget about that role that buildings can play, I would say.
Indeed. Now, you mentioned this new YouTube channel. Is it part of the existing Passive House Accelerator channel or a completely separate channel?
Thank you for asking. It's completely separate. And the reason for that is our current the existing channel, Passive House, is called Passive House Accelerator. And that is a storehouse and library of our live events. So we record every Zoom call that we do. All the presentations are available there. This new channel is video that's created for video. So this are, quick, pithy explainers and project tours, and we have a video producer now on staff full time who is helping us produce this work. And the purpose of that is we understand that there's this big community of people who care about building decarbonization. They may not be willing to invest in watching a recording of a Zoom call, right? That takes a certain level of commitment and geekiness that we hope that a lot of people will progress to. Yeah. But at this point, we want to be able to tell the story to the 80,000 members of the membership of the American Institute of Architects, for example. Right. And so that's the purpose of Reimagine Buildings is to create content that and video stories that will hook people quickly.
Great. Well, make sure I have the link for that. I know you sent it to me in our pre-show last week, but I've lost that. Oh, okay. Yeah. So when you go to YouTube, if you just search on Reimagine Buildings, you will find the channel. It does show up easily, so that's great. And it's at Reimagine Buildings. So, and you'll see a classic Passive House symbol, the symbol of the home or the building envelope, and so you'll find some shorts there. They've now launched. I got to click through. So you've got 2 videos on there now, and then how many videos will you be adding? Over the months in the next 6 months? What's your goal?
We'll do a new video a week, in addition to a bunch of shorts that are related to that video. Wow! Total will probably be 5 pieces a week, but there's that one feature that will be produced every week.
Very cool.
So have one. The next one that's coming up that will be published probably by the time this podcast airs is a tour of Michael Ingwe's retrofitted Brooklyn brownstone. So it's the first episode of that series we're calling Passive Pads. So
cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Zach Semke, director of the Passive House Accelerator, for coming on the show. How can our listeners find you, Zach?
I'm on LinkedIn at Zachary Semke, and join us at the Accelerator. We'd love to see you on one of the Wednesday calls. It's open to everybody. Every first Wednesday of the month, we do a 101 edition of Passive House Accelerator Live. So if you're new to Passive House and buildings and decarbonization, that's a great place to start too. It's a fun group.
Great. Well, check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. That's the best thing you can do to help others find this content. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me at cleanpowerhour.com. And tell your friends about the show. That is the best thing to raise awareness of the importance of clean energy and the energy transition writ large. I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Take care. The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.